Welcome to Mr. Palehouse. Tonight I'm bringing you 7 hauntingly true cruise ship horror stories, real accounts of people who boarded luxury liners and never came back the same. Have you ever heard about the woman who vanished right after a midnight karaoke performance, captured on surveillance calmly walking into a sealed metal door that no one had opened in years? Or the quiet crew member who refused to even pass through Deck 4 until a raging storm forced the ship into repairs, and what they uncovered beneath that floor silenced everyone on board? If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from tonight. Now, let's step aboard. My name is Derek Hollis. I'm 44 from Oregon, and I took my first vacation in 7 years last fall, solo. No family, no partner, no colleagues to make small talk with. Just me, a Kindle, and an all-inclusive cruise to unwind. The ship was the Solstice Mare, a beautiful aging liner refurbished into a more mature experience. Less party energy, more peace and quiet. The route started in San Diego and curved down the Pacific coast toward Costa Rica. 10 days, mostly calm water, good food, and open sky. By day 4, I'd fallen into a rhythm: breakfast at sunrise, pool chair by 9, casual wandering in the afternoons. I kept to myself. I wanted to feel invisible for a while. That morning started like the others. I got up early, put on a hoodie, and headed up to the deck before most passengers were even out of bed. I liked it like that, just the sea, the wind, and the faint scent of salt soaking the wooden railing. But that morning, something was floating in the pool. I almost missed it at first. The water was still, undisturbed, but bobbing near the edge, half sunken, was what looked like a small, weather-beaten book. Not a menu, not a towel, a book. Curiosity got the better of me. I fished it out. It was cold, waterlogged, leather-bound. No logo, no branding. On the cover, faded in gold ink, were the words, "Voyage Manifest Vertical Bar, May 1991, Vertical Bar Deckmaster Copy." I flipped it open. Inside were names. Dozens of them, neatly typed in an old-school serif font. Name, room number, boarding port, date, passengers, full families, couples, solo guests. Then, handwritten notes beside each name. Not check marks, not initials. Notes like, slipped near engine chute, partial recovery, found with life vest, suspected gas inhalation, lost contact after 4th night, presumed overboard, identified via dental records, only one wrist. Each entry written in the same thin, slanted handwriting. I stood there flipping pages, water dripping onto my shoes, heart beating louder with every turn. There were about 130 names in total. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that several names felt familiar. Too familiar. One in particular, Teresa Ning, caught my eye. I remembered the name from a story I'd read years ago. A woman who went missing during a Mediterranean cruise in 2012. Vanished without a trace. It had been in the news for weeks. And yet there she was, listed in this log. Boarded May 1991. Cabin 1124. Handwritten beside her name. Jumped before sunrise. Seen by no one. Water calm. I started scanning more names. Another popped out. Michael A. Barron. Died during a freak engine explosion in 2007, if I remembered correctly. But the log claimed he'd been on a completely different ship. Boarded May 1991. Cabin 2107. Note trapped near service hallway. Burned before rescue. I took the log straight to guest services. The man at the desk, a younger guy, fresh-faced name tag said Leo, raised an eyebrow as I set the dripping book down in front of him. "Where did you get this?" I told him. Deck 7. Floating in the pool. He picked it up carefully, frowning. "This isn't one of ours." I asked if they had records of the Solstice Mare sailing in 1991. He typed for a while, then said this ship was commissioned in 2006. We both stared at the soggy log for a long time. Leo eventually said he'd pass it along to management, slid it beneath the counter like he was hiding something radioactive. I didn't see it again. That night I couldn't sleep. I started Googling, searching names I remembered from the log. There were more, so many more, some well-known cases, others obscure. One woman had been found wedged in a staircase on a luxury liner in 2019. A teenager disappeared on a senior class cruise in 2004. A chef found dead in his quarters in 1995, ruled an accident despite no sign of injury. All listed in that same 1991 log. But how? By 3 a.m. I had a sick knot in my stomach. I couldn't stop going down the rabbit hole. Every name I searched turned up a real cruise ship tragedy. Different years, different oceans, different ships. But every one of them was already written down in that logbook, dated May 1991. I barely slept. The next morning, I went straight back to guest services. A different staff member was on duty. Middle-aged, stone-faced name tag read Sharon. I asked about the book. I didn't mention what was inside, just said I dropped something off with Leo the night before. Her response? There's no one named Leo working here. At first I laughed, thought it was a mix-up. I described him light hair, blue lanyard, polite, maybe mid-20s. Sharon didn't even blink. There's no staff on this ship matching that description. I asked to speak to the officer in charge. She stepped away, never came back. That was the last time I brought it up. I didn't tell any other passengers. I didn't push for answers, because I noticed something that afternoon that made me stop. I was walking past the library when I heard a woman muttering to herself. Her voice trembled like she was praying. I peeked inside. She sat alone, clutching a notebook, eyes wild with fear. I saw what was scribbled on the page. A list of names. Some were the same as the ones in the log, some I didn't recognize. But at the top of the page, in shaky handwriting, she said written, "They were all on this ship. I know it." I left quietly, didn't say a word. That night I locked my cabin door and placed my phone, face down, against the wall. Something about the silence felt unnatural, like it wasn't empty, just waiting. The last day of the cruise, I woke early and stepped onto deck 7 again. The sky was pink with sunrise. A few staff were out setting up chairs. Music drifted softly from hidden speakers. And then I saw it, floating in the pool again. But this time, not a book. It was a photograph. Soggy, but intact. Black and white, looked like it had been taken decades ago. A group shot people lined up on a ship's deck, smiling. At the center of the photo was a man I recognized. Leo. Same soft smile, same blue lanyard. But the photo was dated in pen along the bottom. Farewell Night Vertical Bar, May 1991. MS Bellina. Not Solstice Mare. Not the ship I was standing on. I took the photo home with me. Didn't show it to customs, didn't mention it to anyone. Back on land, I found a maritime database of decommissioned vessels. The MS Bellina was listed, a mid-sized cruise liner, retired in 1994 after a mechanical failure during transatlantic operations. No fatalities recorded, it claimed, but a note beneath that said, "Conflicting internal reports, see archival logbook destroyed 1995. It's been months now. I've tried to forget it, but every few weeks I dream about standing on that deck again, looking down into the pool. And something is always floating in it. A name. Sometimes mine. Sometimes yours. All I know is this. That log wasn't just a list. It was a warning. Somewhere out on the ocean, between ships that sail and ships that vanish, between people who board and people who never come home, there's a voyage still happening. From 1991, with passengers who never made it back. And sometimes that voyage reaches out, just for a moment, looking for someone to add to the list. My name's Elena Vega. I'm 36, from San Diego, and I used to be a guest relations manager for a mid-tier cruise line called Ocean Spire International. I worked that job for 4 years, until something happened that made me leave the industry for good. The cruise was a 10-day northern route, Nova Scotia to Greenland and back. We were on the SS Valinora, one of the older vessels in the fleet. Refurbished, technically. The company always said modernized, but there were still parts of that ship that didn't quite feel updated. Hidden stairwells, disconnected wiring systems, old maintenance rooms that were sealed shut and marked not in use. Still, it was one of our cheaper seasonal voyages, and the passengers didn't complain. Quiet crowd, mostly retirees, a few couples, some solo travelers. Things were uneventful the first 2 nights. But on night 3, a couple in cabin 312 rang the desk around 1:30 a.m. I answered. The woman sounded shaken. "Someone sits whispering into our intercom," she said. "We thought maybe it was the bridge paging us by mistake, but it's just a voice, repeating a name." I asked what name. She hesitated. "Daryl." I logged it, promised we send a technician. An hour later, another call. Cabin 409, different deck, same complaint. Only this time, the name was Stella. I went up personally, knocked. The man who answered looked half asleep and frustrated. "Your intercom just crackled on out of nowhere," he said, like static. Then someone whispered, clear as day, kept saying Stella over and over. I checked the unit, nothing wrong with the speaker. No call button engaged. I had engineering inspect the system the next morning. They said the bridge hadn't transmitted anything, not to those rooms, not at that hour. And they found no malfunctions. But the complaints kept coming. Night 4. A teenage girl in cabin 217 reported hearing 2 voices, arguing softly somewhere between her wall phone and the speaker above the bathroom mirror. They kept saying the name Silu Sid, she said. One of them sounded like they were crying. I brought it to my supervisor, Marta. She brushed it off. "These old ships do that," she said. "Audio echoes. Cross-channel bleed. It sits harmless." But I didn't sit by it, because the guests weren't set just hearing whispers. They were all reporting names, and no 2 were ever the same. By night 6, I'd logged 11 separate names, all reported by different cabins on different decks, none of them connected. I started to wonder, so I dug into the ship's legacy manifest. The Valinora had a long service history back when it was operated under a different name, the Caledonia Breeze. That's Seps when I found the fire. It happened in 1987. A mid-deck electrical fire sparked during routine maintenance. The blaze spread fast, burned through crew quarters before suppression systems even kicked in. 7 crew members died. The archive incident report listed their names. My blood ran cold. Every single name reported by passengers over the past few days, every one matched that list. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the intercom handset by my bed listening for static. And sometime after 2 a.m. I heard it. It was faint, like someone breathing into a cold phone line. Then came the voice, soft, male, whispering one word. "Elena." I sat there frozen, the receiver pressed to my ear, breath caught in my throat. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Elena," drawn out like it knew me, like it had always known me. I hung up and immediately called Marta. No answer. So I went to the bridge. The night officer on duty, Garrison, let me in without question. He looked exhausted. Before I could speak, he said, "You're not the only one. 2 of our own crew heard something through the wall units. Plava logging the calls quietly, but it's not just passengers anymore." He leaned in. "One of the engineers swears he heard his mother Set's name. She died 10 years ago. Had nothing to do with this ship." I asked him if he'd reviewed any of the intercom logs. Automated recordings, channel echoes, anything. He pulled up the data. For the past 4 nights, brief power surges had occurred in isolated parts of the intercom system, just long enough to trigger the microphones in passenger rooms. But no official broadcasts had been sent, and no recordings were saved. Almost like the ship itself had edited them out. By the next morning, half the staff knew. No one said anything out loud, but eyes lingered longer. Conversations hushed when I walked into the mess. I caught one of the cleaners pressing her ear to a wall near cabin 303. When I asked what she was doing, she just muttered, "They stir louder near the vents." I didn't know what she meant, until that night. I returned to my own cabin just after midnight, sat down with a notebook. I listed all 7 crew members who had died in the 1987 fire. Daryl Mason, engine room. Stella Nguyen, kitchen. Louis Lou Hargrove, maintenance. Marla Penn, laundry. Thomas Rivas, deckhand. Jackie Miles, nurse. Walter Lane, bridge assistant. I matched every name to a passenger report, and it all aligned perfectly. Even the rooms matched. 4 of the cabins reporting whispers had once been part of crew quarters, renumbered during the ship's 2006 renovation. They were whispering from where they died. At 2:11 a.m., my cabin phone rang. I didn't yet answer it. It rang again and again, 6 times, then stopped. I unplugged the handset. Then the overhead intercom clicked on. Soft static, followed by a low voice, almost unrecognizable at first, like something being pulled through water. It didn't say my name this time. It said, "They left us here." I stood up, back toward the door, but the air felt heavy. The vents began to hum, a low, vibrating noise that grew louder, almost musical. I grabbed my room key and left. I ran straight to the sealed crew access corridor, the section of the ship never used anymore. We were told it was unsafe, forgotten wiring, structural decay, but the lock was broken. The metal door groaned open under my hand. Inside, the walls were scorched, faded soot marks traced upward like frozen smoke. Half-burnt signs still hung near the ceiling, emergency procedures, room assignments, crew schedules from a forgotten year. And at the far end of the corridor, an intercom unit was still glowing, green, active. But no power was routed to that section. I stepped closer, and the whispers returned. Not from the speaker, from the walls. Dozens of voices, muffled, distant, layered like a broken radio dial, flipping through old frequencies. I recognized none of them, yet every syllable made my teeth hurt. My skin crawled. Names spilled through the vents, overlapping, blending together, some clear, others warped. And then one voice cut through the rest. A woman's. Soft, melodic. "Thank you for remembering us." The next morning, I submitted my resignation. Marta didn't ask why. Later that day, I learned Ocean Spire planned to decommission the SS Valinora. They called it routine fleet restructuring. But I saw the crew huddled near cabin 312 before I disembarked, peering up at the intercom, not touching it, just listening. I haven't worked a single cruise since, but every once in a while, late at night, my landline clicks once before ringing, and when I answer, there's nothing but static. And in that static, I sometimes hear the faint echo of names I never gave anyone, and one of them is mine. My name's Lucas Patel. I'm 29, originally from Toronto. For 5 years I worked cruise security on and off, mostly for Northern Horizon Cruises. I left the job last spring after something happened that I still can't fully explain. It was the Emerald Warden, a newer ship, sleek, all glass and chrome. Big PR budget, big promises about next-gen security and intelligent guest monitoring. We were about 4 days into a Pacific itinerary, somewhere between Guam and Osaka. Calm waters, low passenger count, routine shift. I was in the security office on deck 2, flipping through low-activity cameras around midnight, when something strange flickered across screen 27, external hull cam, starboard side, midship. At first I thought it was a bird, a shadow, but then I saw the shape more clearly. A man, walking. Not on the deck, on the outer hull. No harness, no railing, no lifeline. Just calmly walking barefoot along the slick metal 30 feet above the ocean. He moved slow, steady, like he was taking a stroll down a hallway. His arms were loose at his sides, head tilted slightly forward, like he was following something just ahead. The sea wind didn't affect him. His footing never slipped. He just kept going. I radioed Marcus, my overnight partner, and had him confirm. He looked, squinted, then swore under his breath. "Jesus, you seeing this?" I froze the feed, zoomed in. He was maybe mid-30s, short dark hair, pale skin, shirtless. His back was speckled with what looked like barnacles, little crusted clusters along his spine and shoulders, like he'd been underwater for a long time, too long. Marcus said, "Check guest facial logs." I did. Match found, cabin 833. Registered to a solo guest named Ethan Griggs, boarded in Honolulu, paid in full, no flagged behavior. We pulled up his onboard activity, no room service orders, no excursions booked. The last time he'd used his keycard was 2 nights ago, entering his room at 10:42 p.m. No record of him leaving. No room cleaning either. He'd had the do not disturb indicator on since boarding. Marcus and I grabbed radios and headed to deck 8. We reached 833 within minutes. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists on ships late at night, when the hum of engines settles into a background groan, and the walls feel just a little too close. We knocked. No answer. We knocked again, louder. Security. Mr. Griggs, are you in there? Nothing. Marcus tried the handle. Locked. He slid the override keycard. The green light blinked, but the door wouldn't open. Something was blocking it from the inside. We exchanged a look, then Marcus nodded. Together, we shoved forward. The door groaned, pushed against resistance for a few seconds, then gave way with a loud crack, like something wet peeling off metal. The room was empty. No sign of Griggs. But the bed was soaked. I mean soaked. Salt water puddled across the sheets, still glistening. A trail led down the side of the mattress and pooled across the carpet, as if someone had stood dripping for a long time. There was no seawater damage anywhere else in the room, no leaks, no open windows, and the room, like all upper guest cabins, was sealed and climate-controlled, no signs of forced entry. And the smell, like the underside of a dock, sea rot, algae, rusted chains, and something more acidic, almost electrical. Marcus checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked under the bed. There were barnacle shards on the floor, tiny broken flakes, as if someone had shed them. We pulled the footage again. The man on the hull had continued his walk all the way to the stern. He paused at the ship's logo, turned just once toward the camera. That's when I got a clear look at his face. It was Griggs, but his eyes, they were solid black. Not sunken, not bruised, just black. No iris, no sclera, like looking into two cold holes punched straight through his skull. And then just before the clip cut out, he stepped slowly over the edge of the hull and vanished into the ocean below. We alerted the bridge immediately. Standard protocol for man overboard was initiated, even though the clip clearly showed no splash, no wave, just disappearance. The ship circled for hours. Searchlights scanned the sea. We launched 2 rescue boats. Nothing. Not a ripple. Not a reflection. But the next morning, it got worse. A steward assigned to Deck 8 cleaning reported that someone had been inside cabin 833 overnight. When pressed, she said the do not disturb light had flickered off around 3 a.m. She went to check, found the door slightly ajar, just enough to let the hallway light catch a figure sitting on the edge of the bed. She only saw him for a second, said he looked wet and empty-eyed. Then he turned his head slowly toward her, and the lights in the hallway blew out. Not dimmed. Exploded. We checked the logs. Power spike. Circuit blown. Fuse box corroded. Not old corrosion, either. Wet corrosion. The kind you'd find on gear that's been left underwater. Only that section of the deck was affected. 833's door was locked again by the time we arrived. Inside, the bed was once again soaked. Same puddle on the floor. Same salt stink in the air. But now, the walls had streaks. Long, uneven streaks, like fingerprints dragging across the wallpaper, 5 feet high, running parallel to the bed. We pulled Ethan Griggs' booking documents again. They looked fine at first. Then we checked the email address listed on his form. It bounced. Dead domain. No history. And the credit card used, flagged as inactive since 2019. He wasn't supposed to be on the ship. The boarding photo. Yeah, that was him. But no staff remembered checking him in. No one remembered seeing him at muster drill. No table assignments. No recorded movements. Just one keycard tap, entering 833 and a face in the hull cam, walking outside the ship like gravity didn't apply. That night, Marcus stayed in the surveillance room. I couldn't sleep. I was jumpy. Every metallic creak felt louder. The whole ship seemed heavier, like something massive was clinging to its underside. At 2:17 a.m., my radio clicked on. Static. Then, Lucas, you seeing this? Marcus Sipp's voice was tight, whispering. I ran back to the security hub. Screen 27. Again. Hull cam. Griggs was back. This time, standing still, facing the sea. Only he wasn't set alone. Another figure stood beside him. Also barefoot. also dripping. Female. Long black hair matted to her face, pale arms hanging limp at her sides. They didn't set move. They just stood there on the hull in silence, watching the water like they were waiting for something to rise. And then both of them tilted their heads at the same moment and turned to look directly at the camera. We blinked. The feed glitched out. The next day, we sealed cabin 833 permanently, welded the lock shut, scrubbed the registry. The guest manifest was quietly updated to exclude Ethan Griggs. No incident report was ever filed. The official record will tell you there was a minor camera malfunction that night. Salt corrosion, they'll say. But I know what I saw. We all did. I quit 2 weeks later, took a freight security job on land. I still keep an eye on cruise news, especially anything about the Emerald Warden. A month ago, I saw a post on a maritime message board. It was from a maintenance diver contracted to inspect the Warden's lower hull during dry dock. He said he saw something strange at the waterline, a handprint sealed into a barnacle bloom. He didn't set take a photo. He didn't set go back down. And he didn't set take the next contract. I don't know who or what Ethan Griggs was, but I'm starting to believe he didn't fall into the ocean that night. He came from it, and whatever followed him onto the ship, his set's not gone. My name's Devin Tran. I'm 31, originally from Sacramento, and I used to work guest services for a mid-tier cruise line called Meridius Voyages. Not anymore. I haven't set foot on a ship since March of last year, and if you knew what I saw, you wouldn't either. This happened on a repositioning cruise from Miami to Lisbon. It was early season, so the ship wasn't at full capacity, about 1,200 passengers total. The ship itself, MV Solaris, was older but well kept. Most of us on crew knew the quirks: slow elevators, creaky plumbing in the aft cabins, outdated systems that needed a gentle tap now and then. I was stationed at the main guest service desk on embarkation day. Long lines, tired faces, lots of questions. That's when he approached the counter. Mid-40s, average height, salt and pepper beard. Wore a charcoal jacket despite the humidity. No luggage. Just a weathered-looking phone in one hand and a printed confirmation in the other. He smiled politely. "Hi, my name's Paul Remmer. I should be in room 1046. I typed his name into the system. Nothing came up. "No problem," I said. "Still in default customer mode. Let me check by room number." I pulled up the 10th deck manifest. Room 1046 was flagged red, non-assignable, sealed for maintenance. I frowned, switched databases, and tried the confirmation number he handed me. Still nothing. I looked back up. He hadn't moved an inch. "I'm sorry, Mr. Remmer. I'm not finding any reservation under your name or confirmation number," I said. "Are you sure this is the MV Solaris?" He chuckled softly. "Pretty sure. I've sailed with Meridius twice before. This was booked 6 months ago. Got a special rate for booking direct." He held out his phone, showing me a screenshot. It looked legitimate. Right logo, correct itinerary, check-in time matched ours. Cabin 1046. But there was something off. The font on the confirmation looked slightly dated, like an older version of our system. I asked him to wait while I called over my manager, Luis. Luis took one look at the room number and froze. The color drained from his face. "I'll handle this," he said quietly. He pulled Paul aside, spoke with him softly, then asked one of the stewards to escort him to the lounge and offer him a drink while we sort out the glitch. When Luis came back, I asked what was wrong. He didn't answer at first, just stared at the screen. Then he said, without looking at me, "That room was sealed 3 years ago. No one booked it since." "Why?" "A man hung himself in there. That should have been the end of it. Simple misbooking. Apology from the system. Shuffle him to a different cabin and move on." But Paul didn't want a different cabin. He insisted 1046 was his. And here sits where it got worse. The next day, housekeeping found the door to 1046 slightly ajar. That's impossible. It had been bolted shut from the inside since the suicide steel reinforced, chain padlocked and flagged on every single cabin assignment system we had. Luis had the only physical key. It was still locked in the master box. Inside the room, it looked like someone had been staying there. Blankets rumpled, toothbrush on the sink, an open paperback on the nightstand, dog-eared on chapter 17. No luggage, no ID, just a faint smell of something bitter, like lemon cleaner and old copper. Security reviewed the footage. No one had entered the room. No one. Later that afternoon, Luis confronted Paul again, quietly. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I lingered nearby. Luis told him there must have been a mistake, that the room wasn't safe, that it was never assigned to him in the first place. Paul just smiled. That sep's the one I booked, he said. It was always 1046. Luis asked him who helped him reserve it. Paul paused, tilted his head, and said, a woman, very kind. On the phone. Her name was... He didn't finish the sentence. He looked up toward the hallway that led to deck 10 and said, she told me I said be welcome. That evening, Luis finally told me the full story behind cabin 1046. The man who had died there 3 years ago was named Robert C. Fenley, a solo traveler from Maine, mid-40s. He had checked in without incident, spent 2 quiet days at sea, and then on the 3rd night called down to the desk. Luis had answered that call. According to him, Robert was panicked. He said someone was knocking from inside the walls of his cabin, not from the hallway, inside the walls. Luis sent up a steward, who found nothing. An hour later, Robert was dead, hung from the ceiling vent with a belt. What was strange, Luis said, was that his final voicemail left on the guest services line didn't sound like panic. It was calm, measured. I get it now, Robert had said. She said's always been there. You just have to listen. The next morning, room 1046 was sealed. The cruise line wrote it off as a tragic suicide, and Luis was told not to speak about it again. He kept his mouth shut, until now. And now Paul Remmer had arrived, booking in hand, insisting he belonged there. By day 3, things got worse. Housekeeping found a second toothbrush in 1046. Then 2 glasses rimmed with lip prints. Then a woman's scarf, laid neatly across the edge of the bed. The thing is, none of it was there the day before. The ship's master log showed no access to the room, no motion triggers, no digital keycard scans, and the security footage, blurred, pixelated. But one clip caught a silhouette standing inside the cabin window at 3:14 a.m. from the outside. Room 1046 had no balcony. Luis finally pulled Paul aside and told him directly that we couldn't let him stay on the ship. Not without ID, not without a verifiable reservation. We offered to pay for his hotel stay in the Azores when we docked, offered to cover return travel. Paul declined, politely. He said, I've already been here. Then, for the first time since boarding, he looked tired. Not confused, not agitated, just exhausted. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed Luis something. It was a cruise badge, the kind Meridius stopped issuing 4 years ago. Embossed on the back in faded gold was Paul Remmer, Deck 10, 1046. Luis locked the badge in the safe that night. I didn't sleep. At 4:27 a.m., the fire alarm in the crew corridor went off. False trigger. We ran to reset it, but as I passed the forward stairwell, I heard a soft hum music, like an old lullaby whistled through teeth. I crept toward the sound, heart in my throat. It was coming from Deck 10, specifically from room 1046. By the time I got there, the door was wide open. Inside, the room looked freshly made. Bed tucked, towels folded, TV off. And sitting on the edge of the bed, bathed in moonlight from the porthole, was Paul. He turned and looked right at me. But his face wasn't set quite right anymore. His eyes were unfocused, slightly off-center, like they weren't tracking anything, like whatever was inside him had stopped trying to pretend. I booked this room, he said again. Sept always had it. Behind him, in the mirror above the desk, I saw something that froze me solid. A second figure. A woman. Pale, wet hair, lips parted in a grin too wide to be human. Standing behind him, staring directly into the mirror. Not at him. At me. They sealed the room again before we docked. Paul Remmer was never found. He wasn't on the disembarkation manifest. His name was wiped from the systems. The badge he handed over, gone from the safe. Luis left the cruise line a week later. I followed soon after. Cabin 1046 is still listed as under maintenance on Meridius ships, but if you ever find yourself on the MV Solaris, you'll notice something strange. Late at night, in certain stretches of the 10th deck hallway, you might hear humming, soft, familiar, like a lullaby you almost remember from childhood. And if you stop and listen long enough, you might hear someone whisper from behind the sealed door, "Welcome back." My name's Claire Donnelly. I'm 42, divorced, 2 kids, both grown and out of the house now. I work in IT management back in Portland, Oregon, and last summer I decided for the first time in over a decade to do something completely alone. No emails, no PTO guilt, no family drama, just me and the ocean. So I booked a solo cruise to Alaska on the Halcyon Meridian. 8 nights, Glacier Bay route, mid-sized ship, mostly older passengers and couples. It wasn't flashy, but that's what I wanted. Quiet decks, foggy views, and room service breakfasts in bed. The first few days were exactly that. Cold, peaceful, uneventful, until we hit open water heading south again. It was a calm afternoon. No wind, glassy sea. The sky had this muted gray glow, like dusk even though it was only 3:30. I was out on deck 6, sipping coffee near the railing. A few other guests were scattered around. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt still. That seps when I noticed the movement. One of the portside lifeboats, the orange capsule-style kind, began to creak slowly outward on its davits. No alarm, no crew nearby, no announcement over the speaker, just the gentle whirring of steel cables unwinding. I wasn't the only one who saw it. A man standing near the rail a few feet from me muttered, "Are they doing a drill or something?" But his tone wasn't casual. He looked uneasy. I leaned over and watched as the boat eased itself down, perfectly smooth, barely disturbing the water. It bobbed once, then sat motionless beside the hull, still tethered, still intact. And then I saw it. A person, inside, slumped in the far corner of the lifeboat, arms hugging their knees, soaking wet, barefoot, dark hair plastered to their scalp like they just crawled out of the ocean. My stomach dropped. There'd been no splash, no cries, no reports of a man overboard, and no one had climbed into that lifeboat, not from the deck, not from anywhere we could see. Security arrived within minutes, ushering us away. I lingered just long enough to watch 2 officers rappel down and open the hatch. They froze the moment they looked inside. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I've always been a bit of a rule bender. I befriended one of the junior stewards earlier in the week, Andrew, early 20s, nervous energy. I caught him outside the service galley and asked quietly, "What happened with that lifeboat?" He hesitated. "They pulled someone out," he whispered. "A man, maybe mid-30s. No ID, no cruise wristband. He wasn't set on any guest list." I asked if he was injured. Andrew just shook his head. He kept asking what year it was. That should have been enough for me to back off. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way the man sat, hugging himself, head down, like he didn't want to be seen. The next day, I went looking for that lifeboat. It had been hoisted back up already, but the crew had roped off the area. From behind the cordon, I could just make out the hatch, bolted shut, sealed tight. I overheard a couple murmuring about the barefoot stowaway. They said the crew was keeping him in medical. No charges, no press, just waiting. That night I was in my cabin trying to sleep when I heard something outside my porthole. A scrape, like fingernails against metal. We were several decks above the waterline. My window didn't open. I stared into the foggy dark for a good 5 minutes but saw nothing. No movement, no light. Just the slow pulse of the navigation beacon somewhere off in the mist. The final 2 nights of the cruise were strangely tense. The crew wouldn't answer questions. Rumors spread. A couple people claimed they'd seen the man being moved through the lower halls, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, eyes closed, muttering. But what chilled me most was something I found the morning before we disembarked. I was walking on deck 6 again, same spot as before, when I spotted something tucked beneath the lifeboat davit, something small and dark. It was a flip-flop, one of those cheap black ones, frayed and worn thin. But on the sole, someone had written in smudged pen, "That didn't come up on my own." I turned the flip-flop over in my hand like it might explain itself. The handwriting was barely legible, soaked through in parts, but it was there. I didn't come up on my own. Not I was rescued, not help me, just that, like a warning. The next few hours felt detached. People laughed at breakfast, took selfies on deck, played trivia in the lounge. But I watched the crew. They were off. The smiles didn't reach their eyes. One officer was sweating through his collar, even though it was maybe 60 degrees out. Before we docked back in Vancouver, we were given a short debrief by the cruise director. She stood at the front of the atrium with her hands folded, and a PR-perfect smile, saying there had been a technical issue with one of the lifeboats, but that it had been swiftly addressed. The phrase miscommunication during routine maintenance was used at least twice. No mention of the man. I approached Andrew again after disembarkation. He looked pale, like he hadn't slept in days. They took him off the ship last night, he told me. 2 guys in unmarked uniforms, no cruise line logos. They didn't cuff him, just walked him off like he didn't know where he was. I asked if the man had said anything else. Andrew hesitated. Only one thing that made sense. He looked up at one of the officers and whispered to Stes, "You didn't close it right." It let me out. Stes. I went home, back to my routines. But I couldn't shake it. You don't just find a man in the middle of the ocean, bone-dry lifeboat, no record of him boarding, no missing passengers, and you definitely don't find him barefoot, sitting silent, scrawling cryptic messages on sandals like he clawed his way up from something deeper. I started digging. The Halcyon Meridian had a history. It used to be called the Seraphim Dawn under a different cruise brand. Back in 2009, during a South China Sea tour, there was a small fire on board, contained quickly, no casualties. Except, a lifeboat was reported missing 2 days later. An internal report never made public described it as likely swept loose during fire suppression. No distress calls, no search initiated, just vanished. That was 14 years ago. The man they pulled from the boat, he looked about 35. I filed a formal inquiry with the cruise company, never heard back. Their customer service gave me a scripted response about respecting guest privacy. I asked about the man's name. Silence. I asked about the flip-flop. Click, call ended. But that night, someone left a voicemail on my burner number. Blocked ID. Scratchy audio. A man's voice, low and ragged, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. He said, "It wasn't supposed to open. I heard them laughing. I heard the water. Then I woke up in light. Done go near lifeboats. Then static. Then silence." I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or sea curses. I still don't, but I've been on 7 cruises in my life, and I'll never step on another one, not after seeing that man's face. Because the moment they lifted that lifeboat back up, I looked down from the railing above. He turned his head just slightly, just enough to glance up. And I swear to God, he looked like he hadn't aged a day in years. His eyes weren't wide in panic, they were empty, as if wherever he'd been, whatever had kept him beneath that lifeboat's hatch for more than a decade, had drained everything human out of him. And when he blinked, just once, I felt something shift in my chest, like gravity tilting, like being seen by something that shouldn't have made it back. I don't know how he got there. I don't know how the cables unwound themselves, but someone or something let him out. And if that lifeboat lowered itself, it might not be the only one waiting to open. My name's Tyler Jensen. I'm 28, originally from Halifax, and I've been working cruise ships since I was 20. Started in kitchens, worked up to logistics crew. I've been on everything from 2-day booze cruises to 3-month transatlantic tours. But the one I'm about to tell you about, it was supposed to be a simple 3-week route through the South Pacific on a mid-sized vessel called the Asteria Dawn. It turned into something I still don't know how to explain without sounding like I've lost my mind. It began before we even left port. There was this guy, Mateo, early 40s, maintenance division, Filipino, quiet, extremely efficient. I'd worked with him before on another ship, dependable as hell, but always distant, not in a rude way. Just someone who kept to himself, did his job, and vanished back to the crew deck without much small talk. On the Asteria Dawn, we were assigned to adjacent bunk rooms, except Mateo refused to sleep in his room 417, lower crew deck, forward side. He argued with management during crew onboarding, and they eventually moved him to a makeshift cot in the laundry bay on deck 2. Nobody thought much of it. People develop weird routines on ships, superstitions, preferences, private trauma. You learn not to pry. But over time, people started whispering. Deck 4 on the Asteria Dawn was off. Not cursed or anything, I don't believe in that. But even among crew, it was the one level nobody liked working late on. Half of it was passenger cabins, the other half utility. Dimly lit, quiet in a way that felt unnatural. You'd hear little things buzzing, lights, fans clicking, but the moment you stepped onto deck 4, it felt like the ship was holding its breath. Sometimes the motion sensors wouldn't trigger. You'd walk the entire hallway under dead lights, the carpet muffling your footsteps until your own breathing became the loudest sound in the world. Anyway, one night about a week into the trip, a pretty nasty storm hit while we were crossing between Vanuatu and New Caledonia. It wasn't dramatic, just strong winds and brutal sideways rain that went on for almost 36 hours. Passengers were sick everywhere. The pool had to be drained, and we took some structural damage. Nothing that put us in danger, but enough that the captain rerouted us to a dry dock repair stop in Suva. That's when things escalated. Once we docked, the maintenance team, including me and Mateo, was tasked with clearing debris and doing walkthroughs of all lower-level sections that had taken on water. Most of it was fine. Clogged drainage here, some flooded laundry bins there. But when we reached deck 4, Mateo froze at the stairwell. I looked back at him and said, "Come on, man, you sutter on shift." He just shook his head and muttered, "I don't set go there." That's all he ever said about it. I shrugged it off, the kind of shrug that says, "You're a grown man and that's not my business." But I'll admit, I didn't love walking that deck alone. Down in one of the far corners of the crew utility section, behind a rarely accessed electrical panel, we found a warped wall section that had buckled during the storm. Not a huge collapse, just enough to crack open a sealed panel of plasterboard and old metal framing. Behind it was a cavity, not on any of our blueprints. It looked like some kind of storage or crawl space. About 3 feet high, pitch black. The smell hit first, sour and stale, like rusted water, and something far worse buried beneath it. A rotting, almost sickly sweet odor that felt like it clung to your sinuses. I radioed for backup and grabbed a flashlight. When we cleared the space further and crouched inside, we found it. It was skeletal. A body, curled into itself like it had tried to make itself disappear. Tattered remnants of a crew uniform still clinging to bones. The fabric was sun-bleached, brittle, and covered in dust. The jawbone had a cracked molar. The forearm bones were fractured and twisted in a way that made it hard to look at. It didn't look buried. It looked hidden, forgotten. We backed out slowly, silent, like we were afraid to wake it. Security was called. The area was sealed. Within hours, an investigator from Shore Patrol was on board. We weren't given many answers, just told to resume our duties and stay clear of deck 4 until the review was complete. But I noticed something. Mateo disappeared after that. His cot was empty. No bags, no logout, just gone. I asked around. Nobody had seen him leave. He didn't disembark. His ID wasn't scanned at the dock. It was like he'd vanished the moment that crawl space was opened. Mateo's disappearance wasn't treated like a crisis, at least not officially. His name was never announced over the PA. There was no formal search, just a quiet memo sent to crew leads, staff member Mateo G, unaccounted for during shore leave. Report any sightings to command. That was it. But here's what shook me. That night I was off duty. Couldn't sleep. I kept hearing something, faint tapping sounds in the ceiling above my bunk. I figured it was just pipes or wind echo, maybe leftover movement from the repairs. But then I saw it. At 2:43 a.m., I was heading to the galley to grab a snack. The halls were empty, lights dimmed for nighttime mode. I passed the main stairwell and glanced down toward deck 4 out of habit. Someone was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Not moving, not calling out, just standing there, half shrouded in shadow. It looked like Mateo, same uniform, same stance, but something felt wrong. The posture was too stiff. His head was angled upward, like he already knew I was watching him. I said his name, softly, no response. I took a step forward. The lights on deck 4 flickered once, and when they came back on, he was gone. I didn't report it, I just went back to my bunk, shut the curtain, and lay awake until morning. The next day I asked one of the older engineers, a guy named Russ, if he'd known Mateo for long. Russ scratched his chin and said something I still can't explain. He said, "You mean the new Mateo? The one with the bad left knee?" I nodded, confused. Russ frowned. "That guy sits not the first Mateo to work on this ship. There was another, same name, same division. He went missing 12 years ago, on this very deck." I thought he was messing with me, until I dug through the archived maintenance logs. Sure enough, Mateo Guzman, maintenance technician, age 31, reported missing during a Pacific route in 2011. Last seen doing electrical checks near Deck 4. No body found. Assumed to have gone overboard. Except he didn't set, because now I'd seen what was left of him, curled into a forgotten hole beneath the deck. And the man I'd worked beside, the Mateo with the stiff left knee, the one who refused to sleep near that level, he had no employee record before this year. No contract trail, no medical files, just a name badge, a quiet demeanor, and eyes that seemed to carry something too heavy for the living. We disembarked 2 days later. Once emergency repairs were complete, the ship was scheduled for an extended dry dock, pending investigation, though most guests were never told why. I quit that month, didn't bother transferring to another vessel. But I couldn't let it go. I sent anonymous inquiries to a few contacts, former crewmates, ship engineers, people I trusted. One of them sent me a blurry old security capture from 2011, dug up from a personal archive. It showed Mateo, the original Mateo, walking down Deck 4. He looked just like the man I'd worked with, except younger, lighter, not weighed down. The timestamp showed the footage was taken hours after he was already listed as missing. In the picture, he's glancing over his shoulder, like someone was following him. It's been a year now. I've taken a job on shore, logistics for a freight company. No ocean, no passenger lists, no disappearing coworkers. But sometimes when I'm alone in the warehouse after hours and I catch a flicker of movement in the corner of my vision, I remember the way Mateo looked standing at the bottom of the stairwell, rigid, wrong, expecting me. I don't know what Deck 4 was hiding. I don't know how long that crawl space stayed sealed, or how many others might be buried behind bulkheads, under boards, behind forgotten walls. And I don't know if the Mateo I worked with was ever really alive. I'm Marcus, 35, born and raised just outside of Seattle. I've worked in marine audio engineering for the past 10 years, cruise lines mostly. That's how I ended up on the Pacific Belle in January of last year. It was a 2-week repositioning cruise from Alaska to Mexico, light on guests, mostly seasoned travelers and solo passengers escaping winter. I wasn't supposed to get involved in anything more than equipment calibration, but sometimes, things don't care about your job title. The Pacific Belle was an older ship, though still operational by the company's standards. The kind of ship where some of the cabins still had brass fixtures and faded wallpaper curling at the edges. But she had charm, large decks, an echoey ballroom lounge, and a quiet hush at night that made you feel like you were alone in the middle of the ocean. On the 4th night of the cruise, I wandered into the Stardust Lounge just after 11 p.m. The room had that kind of surreal cruise ship lighting, dim purple gels washing over a low stage, bar lights twinkling faintly behind dusty bottles. A handful of passengers were scattered around velvet booths. The karaoke machine was still going, even though most people had already staggered off to their cabins. That set us when I saw her. She was standing near the mic, humming along to an instrumental intro. Fleetwood Mac, I think. Slim frame, early 30s, tan linen dress, auburn hair and a long braid. There was something fragile about the way she gripped the mic stand, like she was trying to hold herself together. Her name was Jenna. I only know that because she introduced herself to the room just before singing. "Jenna, from New Hampshire," she said softly. No last name, no details. Just that. I watched her sing Dreams with a voice that shook a little in the higher notes but carried emotion. It was clear she wasn't drunk, just tired, sad, maybe. When she finished, a few people clapped. She gave a little bow and made her way back to the corner booth where she'd left her drink. I don't know what compelled me to sit near her. Maybe the loneliness of the open sea. Maybe the look in her eyes, like she'd seen something that wouldn't let her go. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. I asked how her trip had been so far. She gave vague answers, said the open ocean made her feel less watched. She laughed a little when she said it, but her eyes didn't smile. Said she liked late nights because things feel more honest when everyone else is asleep. When the lounge finally closed up around 12:30 a.m., I offered to walk her to her cabin. She declined politely, said she was going to wander the upper decks a bit longer, said she liked the quiet. That was the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, crew chatter started around 8 a.m. Jenna hadn't shown up for breakfast. That wouldn't have been strange, except her cabin was untouched. The bed still made, suitcase neatly zipped. No signs of struggle, but her keycard hadn't been used since around midnight. Security logs showed no disembarkation, no activity at all after that. I didn't mention our conversation right away. I figured she'd just slept somewhere else, maybe passed out on a lounge chair or hooked up with someone. But by noon, staff had done a full sweep of the decks, bathrooms, and infirmary. Nothing. Then the real strangeness began. The head of security, Ramirez, a quiet guy who didn't joke around, called me into the control room late that afternoon. He knew I had a tech background, and he wanted help reviewing internal surveillance from the Stardust Lounge. "We saw I've got a blank window," he said, rubbing his temples. "Camera 12 cuts out for 9 minutes from 12:31 to 12:40. I sat with him, and we replayed what footage we had. There she was, Jenna, walking toward the rear lounge exit near the sound booth. At exactly 12 hours 30 minutes and 58 seconds, she stepped out of frame, and then nothing. Static. The feed resumed at 12:40 with an empty hallway. She was gone. We pulled footage from other angles on Deck 7. That's when things got weirder. A side hallway, poorly lit, rarely used. It connects the lounge area to an old maintenance corridor that had been sealed off a few years back due to structural issues. One camera, camera 14, caught Jenna walking that way. Same tan dress, barefoot now. No hesitation in her steps. But here sits the part that sits burned into my memory. She walked straight up to the maintenance door, the one that hadn't been opened in years. I know that because I'd personally wired it shut the previous season during a safety overhaul. She looked at the door, tilted her head slightly, and then walked into it. Not opened it, not pried it, not forced anything. She just walked forward and vanished through it, like it wasn't just even there. I replayed the footage at least 20 times. Same result, no distortion, no visual glitch, no camera tricks. Jenna walked down the dim corridor, barefoot, her braids swinging slightly with each step. The lights above her flickered once. Then she approached the rusted metal door and passed clean through it. No resistance, no hesitation. Her body didn't deform or pixelate. She just disappeared into the sealed steel like it was made of mist. Ramirez sat back, staring at the screen. "That door set's been locked since 2017, he muttered. "There's set's nothing behind it but insulation and a dead-end bulkhead. They sent a maintenance crew to cut it open the next day. Took 3 guys, 2 hours, and an electric saw. Inside was exactly what we expected. Rusted piping, old wiring, and a collapsed ladder that led nowhere. No footprints, no signs of human entry. Just stale air and the sound of dripping condensation. But here's the thing that made my stomach twist. On the far wall, drawn faintly into the grime with a finger or maybe a nail, was one word: watching. No one talked about it. The ship's management made sure the door was resealed within the hour, this time with welded steel plating and a motion sensor. Jenna's name was quietly added to the passenger incident log, as presumed overboard, even though there was no record of her ever reaching the railing. Her photo never made the daily bulletin. Staff were told not to speak of it to other guests. I started having trouble sleeping, not because of guilt, but because every time I shut my eyes I saw her face again in that purple lounge lighting. I heard her say that strange sentence: "Things feel more honest when everyone else is asleep," like she'd been hiding from something that only left her alone in the dark. About 3 days after the incident, I found myself walking the same route Jenna had taken, late at night, alone. Deck 7 was nearly silent, except for the distant hum of engines and the soft groan of metal expanding against the cold. The hallway smelled faintly of seawater and disinfectant. I stopped where she'd vanished. The door was now covered with a bolted steel panel and a red warning sticker: "Maintenance restricted. Do not tamper." I don't know why I did it, but I placed my hand flat against the metal. It was warm. Not ambient warm, body warm. as if someone had just been standing on the other side. I yanked my hand back like I touched a stove. I didn't tell anyone, not then, but from that night on, strange things started happening to me. It began subtly. My cabin door clicking shut when I knew I'd left it open. My phone switching time zones at random, even in airplane mode. Then came the whispers, so quiet I thought I was imagining them. Not voices I recognized, just a low hum of syllables at the edge of hearing. Always behind me, always fading when I turned. I stopped using the elevator after midnight. One night it took me to deck 7 on its own, even though I'd pressed for deck 3. When the doors opened, no one was there, but the hallway smelled sharply of perfume. The same perfume Jenna had worn. After the cruise ended, I tried to put it behind me. I filed my official report, just the technical details. Nothing about the footage or what I felt. HR never followed up. I was reassigned to a different ship a month later, one with newer tech and younger staff. Everyone there talked like the sea was just a job. No hauntings, no stories, just spreadsheets and inspections. But I started doing something I never used to. Whenever I joined a new ship, I checked the guest logs for solo female travelers listed as no known companion, especially ones with vague backgrounds or incomplete emergency contacts. It's rare, but not unheard of. Over the next year, I found 2 more cases like Jenna's. Different ships, different regions. Both women, traveling alone. One disappeared after being seen dancing in an empty ballroom past midnight. The other was last spotted on a jogging track at 2 a.m. Security footage showed her vanish behind a supply closet that hadn't been opened in over a decade. Each time, the areas were sealed off afterward. No official records, no news articles, just quiet notes in the crew logs marked incident resolved. I can explain it, and maybe that sets the point. Not every horror wears a mask. Sometimes it walks barefoot down a hallway, hums an old song, and disappears through walls that shouldn't let anyone in. Sometimes it looks like loneliness, sometimes it looks like freedom, and sometimes it sings karaoke at midnight and smiles like she knows you won't understand until it's too late. I still work at sea, still walk the decks, still watch the monitors, but I no longer stay up past midnight on cruise ships. And if you ever find yourself alone on a vessel in the middle of the ocean and you hear someone singing softly in the distance, echoing through a sealed door, follow it. Not unless you stir ready to be forgotten too.